The local high school in Oakville stood as a pillar of the community, shaping the minds of the town's youth for generations. It was here in the fall of 2022 that a chilling series of events would unfold, forever shattering the town's sense of security and innocence. At the center of this harrowing tale were two individuals. Miranda Jarvis, a vibrant 18-year-old senior, was the epitome of small-town charm. With her long auburn hair, bright green eyes, and a smile that could light up a room, Miranda was beloved by her peers and teachers alike. She excelled in her studies, particularly in English literature, and harbored dreams of becoming a writer. Enter Mark Reynolds, a 32-year-old substitute teacher who arrived in Oakville with a mysterious past and a quiet demeanor that initially endeared him to the faculty and students. As the crisp, autumn air settled over Oakville, no one could have predicted the dark storm brewing on the horizon. The story that unfolded over the following months would test the limits of human obsession, challenge the town's faith in its institutions, and leave an indelible mark on all those involved. This is the true account of how a substitute teacher's unhealthy fixation on a student spiraled into a nightmare that would haunt Oakville for years to come. Miranda Jarvis was born and raised in Oakville, the only child of James and Lucy Jarvis. Her father owned the local hardware store, while her mother worked as a nurse at the town's small hospital. From a young age, Miranda displayed a precocious intelligence and a vivid imagination that set her apart from her peers. Throughout her childhood and teenage years, Miranda's passion for literature and writing blossomed. She devoured classic novels, penned short stories, and kept a detailed journal of her thoughts and experiences. Her teachers often praised her insightful essays and creative writing pieces, predicting a bright future for the young wordsmith. Miranda's life wasn't without its challenges. In her sophomore year, her parents went through a rough patch in their marriage, leading to a brief separation. The experience deeply affected Miranda, and she channeled her emotions into her writing. Mark Reynolds' path to Oakville High School was far from conventional. Born in a bustling city on the East Coast, Mark had always been drawn to the world of literature and academia. He excelled in his studies, particularly in English and philosophy. Despite his academic achievements, Mark struggled to find his footing in the professional world. He began his career as a high school English teacher in his hometown, where he quickly gained a reputation for his engaging teaching style and deep knowledge of literature. However, after 3 years, Mark abruptly resigned from his position under mysterious circumstances. Rumors circulated about an inappropriate relationship with a student, but nothing was ever proven, and no charges were filed following the setback. Mark drifted from job to job, never staying in one place for too long. He worked as a copywriter, a bookstore clerk, and even tried his hand at writing a novel. But success eluded him. As the years passed, a sense of bitterness and resentment began to take root in Mark's psyche. He felt that the world had denied him the recognition and success he deserved. The crisp morning air of September 15, 2022 held no hint of the pivotal moment about to unfold within the walls of Oakville School. As students filed into Mrs. Henderson's advanced English literature class, a buzz of curiosity filled the room. Their regular teacher was out on maternity leave, and today they would meet their long-term substitute. Mark Reynolds stood at the front of the classroom. He introduced himself with a quiet confidence as he began to discuss the semester's curriculum, focusing on Gothic literature. Many students found themselves drawn in by his evident passion for the subject. It was during this introduction that Mark's eyes first fell on Miranda Jarvis, seated in the second row, her hair catching the morning sunlight streaming through the windows. Miranda listened with rapt attention. When Mark posed a question about the themes in Edgar Allan Poe's works, Miranda's hand shot up, and she offered an insightful analysis that caught the substitute teacher off guard. Mark, impressed by her eloquence, engaged Miranda in a brief discussion about Poe's use of symbolism. As they talked, he noticed the spark of intelligence in her green eyes, the way she articulated her thoughts with the maturity beyond her years. For a moment, Mark felt a connection he hadn't experienced in years. The thrill of intellectual discourse with a kindred spirit. As the class progressed, Mark found his gaze repeatedly drawn to Miranda. He called on her often, each time feeling a small surge of excitement at her thoughtful responses. When the bell rang, signaling the end of the period, Miranda lingered behind, approaching Mark's desk with a copy of her favorite Poe story, The Fall of the House of Usher. They engaged in a brief but animated discussion about the story's gothic elements and psychological undertones. As Miranda turned to leave, she smiled warmly at Mark, thanking him for the engaging class. Mark watched her go, a strange mix of emotions during within him, admiration, intrigue, and something darker that he couldn't quite name, that night. As Mark sat alone in his rented room, his thoughts kept drifting back to Miranda. He told himself it was merely the excitement of finding a promising student, someone who shared his passion for literature, but deep down, in a part of his psyche he dared not examine too closely. Mark knew that something had shifted, the seed of obsession had been planted, and it would soon grow into a twisted, all-consuming force that would change everything. In the weeks following that first encounter, Mark Rental's fixation on Miranda Jarvis grew at an alarming rate. Mark found himself looking forward to his advanced English literature class with an intensity that both thrilled and unsettled him. As September gave way to October, Mark's behavior began to change in subtle but significant ways. He started arriving at school earlier, hoping to catch a glimpse of Miranda in the hallways. He lingered in the teacher's lounge, eavesdropping on conversations about students, his ears perking up at any mention of her name. Mark's nights were increasingly consumed by thoughts of Miranda. He pored over her essays, reading and rereading them long after he had finished grading. He began to imagine conversations with her, picturing scenarios where they could interact outside of class. In his mind, Miranda understood him in a way no one else ever had. One evening, while grading papers, Mark came across a personal essay Miranda had written about her aspirations to become a writer. The raw honesty and vulnerability in her words struck a chord deep within him. That night, he crossed a line he had never dared to before. He searched for Miranda on social media. Mark spent hours scrolling through Miranda's public posts, absorbing every detail of her life outside of school. He learned about her favorite books, her hobbies, the cafes she frequented with her friends. Each new piece of information fed his growing obsession, making him feel closer to her. As his fixation intensified, Mark's teaching began to suffer. He would lose his train of thought mid-lecture, distracted by Miranda's presence. Other students noticed his frequent glances in her direction. The way his voice would soften when addressing her, whispers and giggles sometimes rippled through the classroom. But Mark was oblivious to everything except Miranda. Outside of school, Mark's life began to revolve around his obsession. He started frequenting the local library where Miranda volunteered, pretending to browse books while watching her from afar. He would drive past her house on his way home, his heart racing at the thought of catching a glimpse of her through a window. Mark knew on some level that his behavior was inappropriate and potentially dangerous. There were moments of clarity when he would be struck by the magnitude of his obsession, and he would resolve to put it behind him. But these moments were fleeting, quickly overwhelmed by the intoxicating pull of his fixation on Miranda. As October drew to a close, Mark's obsession reached a fever pitch. He began to fantasize about a future with Miranda, convincing himself that she must feel the same connection he did. The line between reality and his twisted imagination blurred, setting the stage for the disturbing events that were about to unfold. The first truly alarming incident occurred on a chilly November afternoon. Miranda had stayed after class to discuss a paper with Mark, unaware of the tempest brewing within her teacher. As she gathered her things to leave, Mark impulsively reached out and touched her hand, ostensibly to take the paper she was handing him. The contact lasted only a second, but it sent a jolt through Mark's system. Miranda, startled by the unexpected touch, quickly withdrew her hand. She noticed a strange intensity in Mark's eyes that made her uncomfortable, mumbling a hasty goodbye. She hurried out of the classroom, leaving Mark standing there, his hands still tingling from the brief contact. That evening, Miranda confided in her best friend Lily about the odd interaction, while Lily brushed it off as nothing serious. Miranda couldn't shake the uneasy feeling it left her with. She resolved to be more cautious around Mr. Reynolds. It didn't want to make a big deal out of what could have been an innocent mistake. Mark, on the other hand, spent the night reliving that moment of contact. In his mind, it became a significant event, a sign that his feelings for Miranda were reciprocated. 2 weeks after the hand-touching incident, Mark's behavior took an even more concerning turn. During lunch period, he overheard Miranda telling a friend about a poetry reading at a local bookstore that evening. Unable to resist the temptation, Mark decided to attend. That night, he sat in the back of the dimly lit bookstore, watching as Miranda and her friends arrived. Throughout the reading, Mark's eyes never left Miranda. He observed every laugh, every thoughtful nod, every whispered comment to her friends. In his mind, he was sharing the experience with her, part of her world. As the event ended and people began to leave, Miranda spotted Mark, surprised in a flicker of unease crossed her face. She approached him hesitantly, asking if he had enjoyed the reading. Mark, caught off guard, stumbled through a response, his usual eloquence deserting him. Miranda quickly excused herself, visibly uncomfortable. As she left with her friends, Mark overheard her whispering, "He's everywhere lately. It's kind of creepy." The words hit Mark like a physical blow. But instead of serving as a wake-up call, they only intensified his obsession. The situation reached a critical point in early December. Miranda had been avoiding staying after class and tried to minimize her interactions with Mark. Frustrated and increasingly desperate, Mark made a decision that would irreversibly cross the line. Using the emergency contact information from the school records, Mark obtained Miranda's home address. One evening, he drove to her house, parking down the street. He sat there for hours, watching the Jarvis residence, imagining Miranda inside going about her evening routine. As luck would have it, Miranda stepped out to take out the trash. When she spotted Mark's car, recognition dawned on her face, quickly followed by fear. She hurried back inside, locking the door behind her. Panicked, Mark drove away, his mind racing. He knew he had gone too far, but he couldn't stop himself. The next day at school, Miranda was absent. When she returned the following day, she looked pale and avoided eye contact with Mark. Unbeknownst to Mark, Miranda had reported the incident to her parents and the school principal. An investigation was quietly launched, but before any action could be taken, the situation would take a dramatic and tragic turn. The morning of December 15, 2022, dawned cold and grey in Oakville, as families across town began their daily routines. Lucy Jarvis knocked on her daughter's bedroom door, calling out that breakfast was ready. When she received no response, Lucy opened the door, expecting to find Miranda still asleep. Instead, she was met with an empty, undisturbed bed. Panic quickly set in as Lucy and James Jarvis searched their home, calling Miranda's name. Her car was still in the driveway, her phone left on her nightstand. There was no sign of forced entry, no note left behind. It was as if Miranda had simply vanished into thin air. The Jarvis immediately called the police, and within hours the quiet town of Oakville was transformed into a hive of activity. Police cars patrolled the streets, and search parties were organized to comb through nearby woods and parks. As the search for Miranda Jarvis entered its second week, the Oakville Police Department's investigation shifted into high gear. Detective Lucy Reeves, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving complex cases, took the lead. Her first order of business was to re-interview everyone in Miranda's life, starting with her closest friends and family. Lily Thompson recounted to Detective Reeves the growing unease Miranda had expressed about Mr. Reynolds' behavior in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She mentioned the incident at the poetry reading and Miranda's discomfort with Mr. Reynolds' increasing presence in her life. On December 23, Detective Reeves brought Mark Reynolds in for formal questioning. In the stark interrogation room of the police station, Mark sat across from Reeves, his usual composure noticeably shaken. Detective Reeves began the interview casually, asking about Mark's background in his time at Oakville School. As the questions turned to his relationship with Miranda, Mark's responses became increasingly evasive. He denied any inappropriate behavior, insisting that his interest in Miranda was purely academic, but when confronted with evidence of his presence outside Miranda's house the night before her disappearance, Mark's facade began to crack. He stammered through an explanation about wanting to drop off some books from Miranda to read over the winter break. His story was full of inconsistencies. As the interrogation wore on, Detective Reeves noticed Mark's right hand constantly fidgeting with something in his pocket. When asked to empty his pockets, Mark hesitated before reluctantly pulling out a delicate silver charm bracelet. With a sinking feeling, Reeves recognized it as the bracelet Miranda was wearing in the most recent photos her parents had provided. Mark's possession of Miranda's personal item was damning. He was immediately arrested on suspicion of involvement in Miranda's disappearance. As he was led away in handcuffs, Mark maintained his innocence, his eyes wild with a mix of fear and something darker that sent chills down Detective Reeves' spine. The news of Mark Reynolds' arrest sent shockwaves through Oakville. The community struggled to reconcile the image of the quiet, intellectual substitute teacher with the disturbing allegations against him. Marks demanded answers from the school board about how such a person had been allowed to teach their children. As the investigation continued, police executed a search warrant on Mark's rented room. Hidden in a locked drawer, detectives discovered a journal filled with rambling entries about Miranda. The evidence painted a chilling picture of Mark's deteriorating mental state and his unhealthy fixation on Miranda, but one crucial question remained unanswered. There was Miranda Jarvis, despite Mark's arrest and the damning evidence against him. There was still no trace of the missing girl. One entry dated December 14 caught Detective Reeves' attention. In it, Mark wrote about a special place where he and Miranda could be together forever, away from the judgmental eyes of the world. The entry was vague, but it mentioned an abandoned property on the outskirts of town. Standing on this lead, police conducted a thorough search of abandoned buildings in the area. On December 27, their efforts paid off when they discovered an old dilapidated cabin deep in the woods outside Oakville. As officers approached the cabin, they noticed signs of recent activity, fresh tire tracks in the mud and a faint smell of smoke from the chimney. With hearts racing, the police team breached the cabin. Inside they found evidence of someone living there recently. The road wrappers, a makeshift bed, and most disturbingly, several of Miranda's personal items scattered around the room. But there was no sign of Miranda herself. Meanwhile, Mark Reynolds remained in custody, stubbornly maintaining his innocence, despite the mounting evidence against him. During interrogations, he alternated between proclaiming his love for Miranda and insisting that he was being framed. His erratic behavior led the district attorney to order a psychological evaluation. Ministers joined the police in searching the woods, hoping to find any trace of Miranda. In a surprising turn of events, on December 30, Lily Thompson came forward with new information. Trembling and visibly distressed, she revealed to Detective Reeves that she had been withholding crucial details out of fear and misplaced loyalty. Lily recounted a conversation she had with Miranda just days before her disappearance. Miranda had confided in her about a secret online relationship she had been having with someone she met in a writing form. This revelation shifted the focus of the investigation. While Mark Reynolds remained a person of interest, the police now had to consider the possibility that Miranda's disappearance was connected to this mysterious online figure. The IP address used by the user in the writing form was traced back to a computer in the Oakville School Library. Cross-referencing the times of the online interactions with the school's records, Reeves found that They coincided perfectly with Mark Reynolds' free periods. This revelation cast the entire case in a new light. Mark hadn't just been obsessing over Miranda from afar. He had been actively manipulating her, creating a false persona to gain her trust and lure her into a meeting. Armed with this new information, Reeves confronted Mark in another intense interrogation. Initially, he tried to maintain his innocence, but as Reeves laid out the evidence piece by piece, Mark's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. In a chilling moment, Mark's demeanor suddenly shifted. Gone was the nervous, protesting teacher, replaced by a cold, calculating individual. With an unsettling calmness, he began to reveal the full extent of his deception. Mark admitted to creating the online persona months earlier, long before he came to Oakville. He had been grooming Miranda online, gaining her trust and fueling her dreams of becoming a writer. As just after dawn, when a search dog picked up a scent, following the dog's lead, rescuers pushed deeper into the forest, hope and dread warring in their hearts. As they crested a small hill, they spotted a flash of color against the dull winter landscape. Miranda's bright blue jacket. Miranda Jarvis was found huddled in the hollow of an old oak tree, cold, dehydrated and terrified, but alive. As Miranda recovered in the hospital, surrounded by her overjoyed parents and a protective police presence, the full story of her ordeal came to light. She recounted how she had agreed to meet mysterious online user at the cabin, believing it to be a surprise, arranged by a supportive mentor. The shock and terror she felt upon discovering Mark's true identity drove her to flee into the woods, where she had been wandering and hiding for over 2 weeks, surviving on stream water and whatever edible plants she could recognize. The aftermath of Miranda's rescue and Mark's arrest was far-reaching. The school faced intense scrutiny over its hiring practices and student protection policies. Several administrators resigned in the wake of the scandal, and the school board implemented stringent new background check procedures for all staff. Mark was convicted on multiple charges, including kidnapping, stalking and child endangerment. He was sentenced to 25 years in prison without the possibility of parole. From Miranda and her family, the road to recovery was long and challenging. Miranda underwent extensive therapy to deal with the trauma of her experience. She found solace in writing, using her journal to process her emotions and eventually turning her story into a powerful memoir that would go on to help other survivors of stalking and abuse. As for Oakville, the town would never be quite the same. The innocence of small-town life had been shattered, replaced by a wary vigilance. Yet in the face of this tragedy, the community had come together, demonstrating the power of collective action and the resilience of the human spirit. The case of Miranda Jarvis and Mark Reynolds serves as a chilling reminder of the dark undercurrents that can exist beneath the surface of even the most seemingly idyllic communities. It highlights the vulnerability of young people in an increasingly connected world, and the insidious ways in which predators can manipulate and exploit their victims.